In today's webinar, we'll be exploring a topic that's timely as we labor far into the pandemic, which is about inclusive performance management, why empathy is the key ingredient. Remote work in a global pandemic may have turned our worlds upside down, but what better time to offer a makeover to the traditional performance management process? How can people leaders and organizations set their managers up for productive conversations around feedback? Success means engaging, retaining, and even growing employees during this challenging and stressful time. What new ways can they maintain a connection with what their workers are thinking and what they're feeling? How can a culture of coaching inform tough conversations to center on empathy and understanding? Before we dive into this topic, we'd like to thank our partner, Bravely. I'll tell you a little bit about them. Bravely connects your people to on-demand, confidential coaching in the moments that define employee experience. Access to Bravely's network of vetted professional coaches fosters employee well-being and development to supercharge performance and help people thrive at work. When leading organizations offer Bravely to everyone, they scale the effort offered by their people teams and transform their cultures in an evolving world of work. Now, a few logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event. So you can look out for an email in about 24 hours that will have a link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management. And look out for a written account of the conversation soon on our website at fromday1.co. At around 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we will have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions anytime starting now using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now, I would like to introduce our moderator, Mila Skinner. She is Chief of Staff to the CEO at One Goal, which is a Chicago-based award-winning nonprofit education advocacy organization that supports college students from underserved communities. She's also the founder and managing partner of the diversity and inclusion consulting firm, Quarter 5. Okay, Mila, over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. And I am super excited to be joined by an esteemed group of panelists. As Steve mentioned today, we are going to focus on something that is very near and dear to my heart as we think about workplace, which is empathy and how it shows up. I am hopeful that everyone who is joining us today has been showing up in their work with a great deal of grace and empathy, both receiving and giving it. I hope that you were doing that pre-pandemic, but especially now, it is incredibly important. And so this group of folks are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how in particular that shows up as we think about performance management and the complexities of it during this very complicated time for our country and for all of those that we are fortunate to work alongside in our organizations. Just to give you all a little read on the style in which I like to moderate, I find it incredibly, insanely boring when you just ask a question and then 6 people answer that question, and at some point everyone's saying the same thing. And so what we will try to do is make sure that we have some varying voices with different questions. I also have asked the panelists to chime in to each other's questions and build on each other's points. So should Sarah share something and Robin have something that she wants to build off of from Sarah's point, Robin, please do jump in so that we can have a conversation as opposed to just a talking at of people. As Steve mentioned, we will open it up for Q&A later so that we can also engage with the audience on some of their questions. But before we jump into the questions that I have for you, I would love if we could go through. I am going to name the order we go in so that we can just keep flowing. But I would ask that you introduce who you are, your name, your role, and the organization or company that you represent. Would also ask that you answer the question and share why empathy is important in your work in ways that are more clear than ever that didn't maybe exist pre-pandemic. So we'll go in the order of starting with Cynthia. We will then go to Deep. We'll move to Jaison, Robin, and then Sarah. So remember your order, folks.
Okay.
All right, Cynthia, let's go ahead and have you start off.
Great, Mila, I have the easy one. I'm the first one to go, so I don't have to remember anything. My name is Cynthia Brown. I work with NetApp. I'm a senior HR director responsible for our Global Pathways organization. That's the top 100 companies within NetApp that I support from a human resource perspective. So this topic is kind of the vein of my existence, and really something that while you may think it's easy, it really isn't. And the pandemic really brought how showing empathy as you go through and both balance and manage performance management with empathy, it's actually quite difficult. And so none of us should feel like, oh, I don't have it, I can't do it really well. It's something I think you have to concentrate and focus on. As companies, I think the pandemic has helped us move a lot quicker to using empathy or showing some sort of caring as you go through and do performance management. Not that it didn't exist before, but I think it really exists now as we really show people working from any and everywhere. I think half the people are on vacation spots or different locations around the globe. And so, or they have young children at home or caregivers or just a whole host of situations, particularly in the summer with all the social movement and everything. It was just a collage of things that hit, and empathy was really at the key and at the crux of it. So I'm hoping that today you'll get some tidbits and things that we're doing and not doing, and I hope to learn a lot as well as we go through that. I did forget to say that NetApp was a cloud-led data-centric software company, very similar to one of our Nutanix here, who's one of our competitors on the call. But we pretty much help customers, and I like to put it pretty simply, is meet them where they're at and help them get where they want to get in terms of the cloud. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'm going to take it over. D follows C, so I'm going alphabetical. I guess all of us have figured that out. So you all know my name, Deep Mahajan. I am the head of people development and culture for Nutanix. It's an enterprise cloud company. Like Cynthia said, we're in the same space. We are about 7,000 employees spread over 60 plus countries in the world. We are a public company. And we've been around 11 years, starting off as a hardware company, and then have had two major transformations of shifting from hardware to software, and then from software to subscription and SaaS, which is our current transformation, amidst everything else that's also changing. Those have been some company-specific transformations I thought would be relevant for our audience today to know. My role here is I lead learning and development people programs globally for the organization. So performance management is a part of a program that I and my team handle for Nutanix. In terms of this question about how empathy is important in your work, like everyone else alluded, it's always been important, but in many ways, the pandemic has been a big leveler, and it's also been a big humanizer. It has put everyone on the same page. The problems are similar, but the difference is that everyone is facing some type of problem or the other pretty intensely, right? So what it's forcing functions like mine and organizations to do at large is to think of ways to humanize processes. How does this bring it to the forefront? And that's become, for me, the biggest opportunity that this pandemic has bring to really rethink, reimagine, how do we do things? How do we approach programs, processes, employee experiences, interactions? It really boils down to each and every conversation that you're having with anyone, be it your direct report or your colleague, and how you're bringing and making it more and more empathetic. Because empathy is the essence of being a human, right? So it's really brought us down to those basic standards of being human. And that is how I'm really looking forward to sharing what everyone has to say and share our experience of how empathy is being applied through programs and processes. That's all from me.
Thanks, Deep. Hello, everyone. My name is Jaison Williams, and I am the head of talent for Fitbit. Hopefully, you may have one on your wrist or know of someone who does. I am responsible for learning and development for talent and performance management, diversity, as well as engagement. And I think one thing that is key around empathy at Fitbit is our company, our mission is to make the world healthier. So even as we've been going through this year, not just with COVID, but with, social justice and everything, to make the world healthier has become even more relevant to us as an organization and the work that we do. But we still have had to amplify, I think, empathy in a different way. And 4 quick ways that we've done that is, one, it's just been doubling down on our focus on well-being. because that shifted. You know, a lot of our well-being was focused on, you know, you come to work and you exercise whenever you want, right? You've got our business casual or Lululemon, right? So, you know, well-being meant a lot of different things before everyone was working remotely versus how it is now. And, you know, leaders and managers play a key part in that. Second is just flexibility. You know, we really had to rethink, what does flexibility mean? And it's not something that can be really defined completely at a global level, right? It's really through one-to-one conversations, understanding what the needs of everyone are. Third is just inclusivity. You know, being an inclusive leader really at this time has really challenged some people and stretched them in different ways to, how do I show my inclusiveness if I'm a manager and I'm single and I have no children, right? My response to the pandemic and how I work and where I work and what I do is very different than someone who's on my team, who's in a caregiver situation or has other family members living with them, and it's just kind of chaos. And lastly, just increased employee listening. You know, we were already doing quarterly surveys, but we have found the need to do focus groups, you know, planting kind of questions on Slack and other ways to get more insight from our employees. So we've had to amplify, you know, empathy in a couple of different ways. And I'll just say, as a kind of as a capstone, all of that, you know, hopefully results in the company still being able to perform well. Because while performance management, we always talk about it, at an employee level, it's really the aggregate of how all employees are performing that are driving the company's performance. And that's really that line that we straddle, how to be empathetic for our employees, but also recognizing that we're in for-profit businesses that need to drive revenue at the same time.
Great, Jason, I'll pick up from there. I actually, maybe I'm going to repeat a lot of what Jason just said, that I think it starts with awareness, which I think you touched on, and just being aware of your employees and their needs. And to your point, you know, the uniqueness of someone who's single and maybe can't relate to aging parents and little kids and the shuffle that comes with that. At the same time, you know, the flip of that awareness that that single person might be feeling very isolated, that they can't go anywhere, they can't see people. And so that's something to be aware of too. So I think just the awareness of what everyone's going through and unique challenges they face. At Genpact, there's been, you know, people are a business. We're a professional services organization. And so we're not making a product, we're selling, you know, people services. And so we've always had an emphasis on culture and taking care of yourself and work-life balance. But 2020 has been a whole new version of that. And Genpact's done a fantastic job of really focusing on wellness and mindfulness and pushing content and information and access to free resources to find ways, something that work for you. I think flexibility is really important. I mean, we're fortunate to be in a business where we can offer our employees a lot of flexibility to do what you need to do. And if it's early or it's late or it's piecemeal throughout the day, that we've been fortunate to find ways to make that work. And another thing that we've done that I know we're not unique, I know lots of organizations have done this, but we've put to our employees a work from home pledge. And so that's something that looks like, you know, I pledge to respect your time. I pledge to understand when you don't want to be ready. I pledge to not comment on your wallpaper taste. I pledge to not judge family members walking in the background, and just giving employees that freedom to open themselves up and just be aware that we are coming into each other's homes, and just some of that sensitivity that some people have around that.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Robin. I'm Sarah Sheehan, co-founder and president of Bravely. Steve already mentioned what we do at Bravely. We're a coaching platform, and I and my team sit in a very unique position in that we are experiencing, obviously, the effects of the last 9 months as an organization, but we are also looking at tens of thousands of sessions and data attached to them around what we're hearing across different organizations. And the common theme and trend here is that, obviously I think we've 7x'd our sessions around stress and burnout. And this is obviously highly connected to performance management. So I'm really excited to have this conversation because at Bravely, we have always integrated empathy into what we call our momentum method, which is the DNA of our sessions. And unfortunately, it took something like COVID to, as Deep said, sort of level the playing field here. But I think it's really presented an opportunity for leaders and managers to approach every aspect of their roles, but performance management in particular, in a new way, right? And it's thinking about, because we no longer can separate the personal from the professional. And, for Robin mentioned, these very different set of circumstances that we all are facing, there needs to be a personalized approach to each person. And so I think I'm excited about today's discussion because you can't do any of that without empathy.
Well, first off, kudos to the best panel in the world for moving through in order. Congratulations and thank you. Yes, you all get gold stars. And so going to pivot to some of our questions. Spoiler alert for the audience, we are going to talk about the unique conditions for our staff, where you do have staff that are parents and caregivers versus staff that may have other responsibilities that don't include that. We will get there. I know many of you brought it up. It is one of my questions. So I do want to just preview for folks that will come. But before we jump in there, I want to talk a little bit about the decision to move forward or not with performance management during this time. There are a few organizations and companies that have decided not to. It didn't feel like the right move for them. And some companies have decided they want to continue doing so. And so for Deep and Jaison in particular, would love to talk to you about this. But again, as I mentioned before, please, any other panelists, feel free to share or jump in. But would love to hear from you all if you chose to move forward with performance management during this time. And if so, either A, what adjustments you may have made, and B, why it was important to continue to do so, if you chose to.
Yeah, that's really a very fundamental, and Jaison, just taking your permission to go first here. It's something that we thought about a lot. And I'll start by saying that, yes, we were one of the organizations that decided to move forward with the performance management. Though we did adapt it, we did delay it a little bit, but we did choose to move forward. And we made this decision very visibly, very audibly, and very transparently, sharing the why with our audience. Start with the why, in fact, is one of our cultural principles. And, so we do explain the why and pay a lot of attention to explaining the why before we're doing it. And our why was like this. So one, we recognize the fact that, and this was happening in the context when there were organizations who we admire and we take inspiration from, like Google and Facebook, who had openly declared that we're going to delay our performance process indefinitely. And Facebook said that we're going to give a 5 rating to all employees, and which are great things, in their context, but we have to understand where we're coming from, right? So that is how we explained our why, to say that we're in a different phase of our evolution as an organization, right? And we're still a growing company, and we need to keep our lights on, right? So we cannot indefinitely delay focus on our performance, right? And that is why we need to do it in a way which is very empathetic. So we really need to heighten our empathy, but we still need to do it, right? That was one. The other one is that just when we were pushed into the pandemic, we didn't have an end in sight, So even if we were to delay it, till what point are we going to keep it at that, right? We cannot abandon our purpose indefinitely, right? We are a very purpose-driven company, and we know what we were doing is not something that, of course, it shifts, you prioritize, but you don't change it. Purpose is something which is grounded in why you exist in the world. And that we were still sure of, that we wanted to continue to move on that path with empathy. We cannot put careers on hold. And one of the things that we did, therefore, to adapt, from a solution standpoint was we brought some mindful adaptations, like simplifying the process a lot, right? So we didn't want it to be as extensive, as detailed as it used to be in the past, right? So that simplification was a big factor that we thought from a process perspective. We also thought that I don't know how ready people will be to take 360 peer feedback, which is also a part of our performance management process. So we thought that if we just lighten the burden there to say it's an optional thing that you may want to do, but it's okay if you don't want to do it, right? That is something that was an adaptation that we got there. We also changed the questions. I'm getting more specific here, but we introduced an empathy question in our set, which allowed people to think about different things. So repurposing the purpose of the conversation itself from performance-oriented to more alignment-oriented, to more support-oriented, to being an exchange between the manager and their teams on what support is needed, what would be some of the new goals, that are worth articulating. How do you change tracks? That was made as a part of the process, right? And that was really, really appreciated. Our results proved that, because we actually touched amazing levels of completion rates, and we are surprising ourselves every time. We've done it twice now during this pandemic. And we touched 86% employee completion and a 92% manager completion the first time round. And this time we've just completed our employee self-reviews, and we've hit a 96% completion organization-wide. So we definitely know that the adaptations that we made, the communication that we did, the leadership involvement into this whole explaining why we are still doing this, it did bear us a result that we were expecting from it. People resonated, and people are our biggest advocates of these processes today, besides us from the people team. So that's our story of sticking with the performance management process and finding success in there.
Yeah, thanks, Deep. We too have stuck with the process, and as a fundamental principle, when we introduced performance management, our foundation was that every employee should know where they stand in terms of performance, and you shouldn't go more than 90 days without knowing how you're trending in terms of your performance. So that's been our guiding, or our true north, in terms of what we wanted to make sure people still got feedback and they understood how they were performing. And I'll just say, and not to go into any detail, all those other elements that I mentioned around flexibility, a focus on well-being, inclusive leadership, and listening have been peppered in all through the year in terms of what we've been asking and helping to drive managers to make sure that they are doing with their employees. So they're having hopefully a lot more touch points than they did before. But from a business perspective, we were not in a position to say everyone gets 100% bonus, right? Our business was impacted by COVID, like many. And so some organizations just financially cannot, determine to make that decision. But we did do a couple of things to really make performance management hopefully a bit more flexible. So over the summer, instead of a typical mid-year review and some organizations doing calibration, we just said every employee needs to have a one-on-one with their manager where they get feedback. And we sent out a very short one-question survey in Workday to say, did you have a conversation with your manager, right? So trying to focus on just feedback. Where we find ourselves now in our year-end process is we're still focused on making sure employees have feedback, but we want to really primarily drive two things. One is that an employee gets to share, here's how I performed, here are some of the issues and things I worked through over the year, and really be able to advocate for how they performed, as well as being able to call out challenges that they encountered. And secondly, we want managers to have enough information where they feel that they can make a call on someone's performance for the year. And that's really a lot driven through the employee being their self-advocate. Similar to Deep, we said, yes, we do value peer feedback. It's optional, it's not required, which is something that's been required in the past. And secondly, if we told our managers, you don't need to do a talent calibration. You know, unless you feel there are certain people that you need to absolutely discuss, we don't need to waste organizational time, because that's a big ramp up to have all those layers of talent calibration meetings. So we pulled that out of the process. Again, from an empathetic standpoint, how can we simplify and streamline in a really busy time for our business, which particularly Q4 with product launches and Black Friday and people getting gifts through Christmas time, have, you know, members of our teams working quite feverishly to make sure when you unpackage a Fitbit that it works. And if you have an issue, there's someone who's around to address it.
Excellent. Thank you, Deep and Jason. I appreciate that. Anyone, Cynthia, Robin, or Sarah, have decided not to move forward with performance management? And then Sarah, for you, I know you work with many organizations, and even if you have an organization in which you've partnered with that's chosen not to move forward with performance management.
Yes, I can tell you that, you know, we work with companies like Zillow Group, Pinterest, the New York Times. Everyone has a very different approach this year, which is incredibly different than last year, obviously. And I think the biggest challenge that, first of all, performance reviews are one of the top reasons that employees come and use Bravely. It's usually like their entry into coaching, and then they're like, oh my gosh, why didn't I do this 6 months ago? And then they never stop. But it's because they're tasked with writing their performance review, and they know that they can get support through a coach to figure out what their accomplishments were or what they need to work on. And so who wants to write their self-evaluation? I haven't ever encountered anyone that's excited to do that. And usually we're sending them to like friends to look at, or colleagues, before we hit, you know, finished. And now you have a professional to help you, right? So what we're seeing, you know, I read this HBR article in preparation for this last week, and it said that 71% of employees encounter feelings of unfairness when it comes to their performance review. So that's pre-COVID. Now you're entering into a period where I'm a mother of, my daughter just turned 1, who doesn't have childcare. I've definitely underperformed this year because of that. There's just no doubt about it. My stress levels are through the roof. I've never experienced, I was 4 days back from maternity leave when we turned around and went back home. And it's just, that's my personal circumstance, and everyone on my team and every employee that we support has their own personal circumstance. You know, my cousin, who's in a high-level job at a company that everybody on this call would recognize the name of, she has the opposite experience. You know, she's had to go and take on more responsibility because of some of the colleagues on her team who aren't able to show up in the same way like me. And so, you know, the question is, how do you evaluate people based on these circumstances? And if you are not willing to, you know, I think the approach of level setting everyone at you know, just saying we're going to come in, and I think you referenced Facebook saying this, like we're going to give everybody a 5. Maybe you don't give everybody a 5, but you give everybody a 3 to start with. And then, you know, there's still opportunity to give that feedback. The interesting thing about our session data is that employees are still coming to us about professional development and how to get ahead in their careers. So it's still very important to the employee. So it's needed, but there has always been an absence of empathy, unless you're just a special, and I'm not saying that there are a lot of special managers, but in terms of like organizations saying we're going to use empathy throughout our performance review process, this is new, and I find it incredibly exciting.
Excellent, thank you. So that is a perfect segue. So thank you for setting me up in that way for the question around how you manage and navigate this, recognizing the diversity that exists with our employees. And so we do have a number of folks that are parents and caregivers, whether taking care of young children like you, Sarah, whether having a please don't tell him I said this, but an older gentleman, my father, in the home with me, and providing care to them. And we have folks who aren't. They have different living circumstances, still have responsibilities, but it looks different than being a parent or caregiver. And so the question for you all is, how do you not overburden those folks? How do you properly assess and reward them for the extra work that they may be taking on because their lifestyle allows them to do so? But how are you not sending a wrong signal to either the caregiver or parent who has to be home and can't take on as much, and not letting them feel as if they're disappointing or not showing up or not performing, while also not sending the wrong signal to the person who's taking on more to say, like, you have to bust your tail and take on other people's work in order to like get the 5, let's say. So I'd love to spend Cynthia and Robin a few minutes on this. There is a point at which I want to bring Steve from day one back in the conversation for a moment, but would love to start with you, Cynthia and Robin, on this topic, and then we'll have Steve come in and then come back to more questions.
Thanks, Mila. I was on mute. This is great, and I did want to chime in here because we were lucky in that it wasn't foresight or anything, but we did scrap our performance reviews last year and rolled out a new performance ecosystem and talent ecosystem called Thrive. And we had a little bit of a jump start in that we rolled that out at the latter part of last year. So this was a real change for the organization, and I think a change that ended up being really, really good and timely. So we had a little bit of a jump start on the pandemic. And what it forced people to do, so we got rid of performance ratings, and instead you have quarterly conversations with individuals that are more personal related and less related to the job. And so that opened up that window. It's always very dicey when you want to talk about someone's personal things or something that may be impacting them. It's always a very dangerous spot to be, but one where you have to be in order to get the performance or the work done. So we had an opening to that. And when the pandemic hit, it worked out in our favor in terms of people were having these kinds of conversations, and they could weave those things in, like, I'm not able to work. I've got to set my 1 year, my first grader up on Zoom at the same time I'm trying to run a call. But it's also forced our managers to really think about what is it that you have to do? What is the role and responsibility for this individual? And to be very clear about your expectations on that, it helps to manage all of that. It can be anything, why they can or can't do something, or when they can and can't do it. But at the end of the day, I am looking at you to do X. How you do that and your performance on that is what we're going to talk about. If you do that at 2:00 a.m. because that's your quiet time, and then you come back to it at 6 or 7 or whatever, at the end of the day, if your task was X and you've been able to accomplish that, then well done. And getting managers to focus on that when they're used to very old school culture in some cases, even though being in high tech, and I think Deep is in, and even Jaison is probably in the same situation where work has already been evolving. And so managers are having to get way clear on what is it that I'm paying you to do, and how do we talk about that, and how you get it done, and what matters and what doesn't matter. So again, those quarterly conversations and our Thrive ecosystem, getting rid of ratings and moving managers to do that was really very helpful. So regardless of if you have to take care of someone in your home, or if you have to get Zoom set up for your first grader or whatever, what was your task for that day, that week, this quarter, whatever? Were you able to accomplish that? One other thing we did, like everyone else, because we had this new Thrive rolling out, we already had those engagement surveys, or what's more popularly known as engagement surveys. And I saw a question that someone asked, what were some of the specific questions regarding empathy that was asked? So we did have a special section, and it talked about what is getting in your way of getting your job done. Again, stay focused on what is the job. That way, instead of us assuming that people had things to do, we were able to really hone in on what it was. A lot of us mentioned well-being, that someone said, I'm just depressed. This is new to me. I'm not coping well, or I've got my husband to deal with in terms of this, or we didn't have enough bandwidth on the Wi-Fi a lot of it dealt with the younger children and education. So Sarah, I absolutely, with a 1-year-old, I've had calls where people like, excuse me, but I have to give the baby a bottle, and you never want someone to have to choose between that and work. And so that flexibility, but being clear on what it is that people have to do in order to get their jobs done was very helpful.
Those are great thoughts, Cynthia. You know, Mila, as I was thinking about your question, you know, I would be challenged to ask, who is getting this 100% right? Because this is very difficult. It's 100% unprecedented. Like, there is no, hey, this is the right way to do it. We're all just kind of jumping in and then look left to right. Like, I don't know, did I make a good decision? So I think, you know, we're doing the best we can, you know, and it's a balance. I think, Jaison, you touched on this, that it's a balance between having empathy and understanding and appreciation for what your employees are going through. But then at the same time, there is a business implication, and we can't just say everybody gets their full bonus, because that's not how it works. So I think it starts with that appreciation for what they're going through. I think we're very fortunate in that our managers and employees have very close relationships. They're in the habit of talking all the time. We have, you know, probably a half or more than half of our workforce was remote before the pandemic anyway. So we had systems and processes in place to do a lot of this virtually, which is helpful. But I think it starts with that manager having flexibility and empathy. And to your point, Cynthia, that a lot of this in our organization, it doesn't matter when you do it, just get it done by the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of the month. And there's a great deal of flexibility in when and how you do it. In addition, it is that, you know, oh my goodness, I set my 5-year-old in my lap sometimes. She's not here right now, but, you know, and just understanding that your coworkers and that your employees have personal things at home that might need to juggle through their day. And so just appreciation for that. But going back to your question of how do you have empathy with those employees who have more demands on their time, given the situation we're in, versus those that maybe can dive in and give a lot more? That's hard. I mean, it's just really hard, is the truth of it. I think in our situation, I don't see us penalizing those people who maybe have always been a top performer and this year maybe they're mediocre. But then we will reward those people who have gone above and beyond, because we have people who are definitely experiencing burnout, and we've asked and asked for them to give, and they keep giving. And we've got to give something back, or, you know, that it's going to break. So I think we'll do what we can to when we can. And with the others, I think we just keep that empathy and flexibility as much as possible.
Can I add in here?
Go ahead, Jaison.
Please.
I was just going to say, you know, if we zoom out, right, and don't think about performance management as just kind of this thing that exists by itself, you know, we ran surveys earlier this year which asked about individual employees, how effective have you been able to work? You know, since you've been working from home. We ask questions around, you know, are you able to switch off? And if not, you know, what's getting in your way? So we have been giving managers through our surveys, hopefully some other insights about their teams that have been useful in terms of helping to determine what work they can do and what work they can sustain given what other factors they have going on. We actually have a different view for us in that when we asked how many of our employees were caregivers, it's actually between a fourth and a fifth, because most of our employees are millennial. So, you know, many of ours are people who are single or maybe living with a partner, but they don't have children, they don't have caregiver responsibilities. And so there was, both within our company and within other tech companies, a bit of a backlash around, why are tech companies doing so much for caregivers? What about us, the people who are not in that role and responsibility? And, you know, that's been a challenge as well that we've needed to solve for, because they do feel like they're going above and beyond, but they don't feel like the organization is doing anything extra for them, like emergency parental leave as an example of that.
Yeah. Excellent. So I'm going to pause for a second. Deep, I know you wanted to engage on this. But I want to have Steve jump in, and then we'll come back to hearing a little bit more on this.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mila. Hi, everyone. I'd like to remind anyone joining our webinar midstream that we're from day one, and today we're exploring inclusive performance management, why empathy is the key ingredient. We have a big audience today, and I think part of the reason is the tension between the two aspects of the conversation, flexibility and understanding on the one hand, and keeping up performance on the other. Our sponsor today is Bravely, and as a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A session at the top of the hour. Now back to you, Mila.
Thanks so much. That was such a great commercial break. I've never had a panel with a commercial break. I like it. Good job, Steve. Thanks. So just as a reminder, again, we are engaging around a conversation related to how to properly manage and balance those who can give a bit more during this time because their living conditions allow for it, and those who have to take a step back also because they have other responsibilities, or caregivers or parents. And so Dee, if you wanted to jump in, would love to have you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going in the flow of the discussion that was happening. And one of the challenges, or one of the insights that we thought a lot about at Nutanix was, how do you build empathy as a two-way street, right? So sometimes on account of how we are thinking about roles and levels, we tend to expect a little bit more from one group. Like the caregiver example is one example, case that we are discussing here, but also managers. One of the things we thought is that, are we asking too much from our managers? Because everything that you're asking is dependent on managers. So of course you're doing a lot to enable them and give them ways, but how do you draw that empathy factor from the employees also back to managers, right? So one of our empathy factors or questions was actually driving that when we asked employees and managers to discuss what support would they like to give each other to get through this, right? And how would an individual like to be managed? Because the standards have changed, in terms of what works in this context, what is right and wrong. Some of those paradigms have completely shifted. So the best thing to do before we figure out what is the right thing to do in this virtual world that we live in is to have a conversation and figure it out yourself. So empower managers and employees to have a conversation. Again, I'm going to reuse the word leveler, that have a human conversation about what's working best and what's the need of the hour. So that's one. The other thing is community performance, right? That's a concept. It's a new concept which has taken birth where I'm responsible for my deliverables, which I am chasing quarter on quarter and accountable for during performance reviews. But now that this pandemic is hitting everyone differently, and you never know when you will go through the intensity of it, everyone is sort of watching out, doing the best, trying to pull through. What if the community was, or the team was, to take a joint accountability of delivering something together, in a phase where some of us are busy taking care of our families, others are more available, they take more, and the tables will turn and roles will reverse eventually, and you'll get a chance. At the end of it, what you will end up doing is, one, stronger bonds, more empathetic bonds. Two, your performance will be sustained because one or the other was watching it, right? So in this way, that's I think one of the ways, like a clear ways to go through this time, when we really take out the boundaries of performance from an individual and take it at a team, at a community level, right? So that's what I wanted to share here on the table.
Thank you, Deep. I appreciate that. Also, whenever you have that background and say paradigm, like magic happens. It's just, they work together. So I want to shift a little bit, because something that's come up is around managers. And so all of you represent a team lead. And we're asking a ton of our managers right now. They are responsible for supporting their teams. They are managing their own lives and the complexity of that. And so it's just very curious to hear from you how you are working alongside your managers in particular, using tools like vulnerability and empathy, and specifically how they're doing that while navigating some of the lines and boundaries that human relations, human resource, human assets professionals have been taught to manage, and how they are dipping their toe in or jumping full body into the water of having different type of conversations. And so, Sarah, I'd love to start with you. Again, you have a wide swath of organizations that you work with, but would love to hear how you're working with managers in particular to navigate the complexity of empathy and the boundaries in which human resources have typically been set up with.
Yeah, this is, I think, one of the biggest challenges, and the majority of the conversations are, I don't want to call them trainings, because they've really just been open discussions with teams, managers, and the teams that make up like management across a lot of the organizations that we serve. And their biggest challenge right now is, how do I drive performance and still be empathetic and understanding of the personal circumstances? And so you're absolutely right that I think most of the pressure right now is being built onto those managers. And our guidance is always that they have to give themselves permission to be vulnerable, share their own personal circumstances, so that their teams are able to come and do the same with them. My belief, our belief at Bravely, is that if you're not willing to have the open dialogue and ask people to come forward and share what's really going on, you won't be able to solve the performance issues. Now more than ever, right? We hear now more than ever all the time, but it's about to get worse again. People are about to go through COVID. I personally know 7 people that are in my inner circle who have COVID right now. This is going to be another potential disaster upon us. And so companies need to prepare themselves for what's to come this winter, which is high impact again. And it comes down to the managers, because they're responsible for this. And I think that what we really need to do is give these managers permission to, they're trying to apply the same methodology across the board so that there's fairness, right? That's not possible right now. Everyone's going to have a different need at a different time. And so you just have to give your managers the permission to have authority on giving a specific level of flexibility to one employee and asking more of another. That's just the hand we've all been given right now, and that we're holding to try and keep our businesses moving forward. And one of the points that I'd love for us to touch on later is that there are certain groups that are impacted right now more negatively than others. Women are being set back decades because of what's happening right now in our careers. And companies really need to commit to making sure that that is not felt inside the walls of their organizations, that they're coming up with ways to support populations that might be more severely impacted. If we're just talking about health, we know that the Black community has been impacted more heavily. And what does that mean? And how are we going to show up in the midst of other complications like racial injustice on top of what we're facing here? So I know I'm throwing like a lot of different things at the group right now, but it's not just about, we're all dealing with numerous challenges and complexities, and we're not going to be able to have this like leveled approach that feels like everybody's getting the same support.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Cynthia, please. No, don't be sorry.
I was going to add one of the things that I've found that is we do have tools. And I'm sure as many companies, as most of us on the call, we have what's called pandemic prevention days. We have pandemic funds that they can spend monthly on things that they might need to be up and running or whatever. We have certain, you can use Zoom for personal things. And, there's just so many different things that are available. And while we have it on a website, I always say anything that you have to, someone has to pull won't help. So if you push it to them, so if you talk with your managers and remind them that, oh my gosh, we have pandemic prevention days. How many of your employees have had a need to utilize that? Here's some good cases. Here's what some other managers are doing. Or someone so doesn't have a monitor or a monitor stand, they can bank their money up. You get so much dollars a month and then save that up and then get a chair that's comfortable. Or we have ergonomics. We have exercise programs that people can do. But as a manager, you have to, one, feel comfortable enough to know when to leverage and use those tools that you have, so that we can make sure, because people say, well, people aren't using it. Well, they don't know. And that's a good place for the managers who are somewhat floundering and not sure what to do. You'd just be amazed at, like, hey, you have daycare responsibilities. You have a pandemic prevention day. Take today off and log it to that. I don't need you to do this. So there are things that are available within bounds that are really good to use. So I always find that reminding managers and employees, all of us, managers and individual contributors, what's available to you or what the company has done. People tend to know about those things less, only because of what I said, if you have to go up and read it off a website or something, but push that out as much as you can. And don't be afraid to use the resource. There are resources out there, leverage all of them.
One of the things that we did at Nutanix, similar to this, was we doubled down on our efforts to prepare employees for definitely wellness, but performance as well. What's changing, or what's the change context bringing to those conversations that they are having about their performance, about their alignment with the managers, and what can they do in that circumstances. So we gave them specific tips like complete the picture for your manager, right? They may not know what you are delivering. They may not know what you have accomplished. So it's your job to take accountability for getting that information across to them. And how can you do that? How the pandemic may have affected their relationships, their awareness of what's important for the company, the leadership OKRs. So how can employees take the accountability and really start that bottom-up process of wanting to be aware rather than expecting to be made aware, And that is how we sort of ease the burden on the managers a little bit by saying that if the manager is not able to do it for some reason, the employee should be able to do it and get this information, which will help them align, which will help them know what's working, what's not working, and which will help them complete the picture. So that process also really was very well appreciated, because people, we assume that employees know how to go through it, but they need more help to even tell their own stories. So that enablement drive for employees was very well appreciated across Nutanix.
And one quick point. We have monthly manager forums, and it's 1 hour where we pull managers together. We do it on a regional basis, and it's really to help build their skill and capability. But we've also been slicing and dicing our engagement data so we could pinpoint in management, right, from manager to senior manager on up, where were groups that were seeing high levels of stress and issues that were impacting well-being. And we could use that to then tailor the sessions we did. So we actually did one last month just on going through the change curve, you as a manager, right? Because this year has been a roller coaster of many changes. And have you really been taking time to think about where you are, right? And understanding that, and then, doing that same application to your team. And probably in, June or ish, somewhere around there, we had a manager forum focused just on stress and well-being and resilience. So we've taken some of the data and used it to influence, our interactions to help with helping to better prepare managers for themselves, but also to help them in terms of how they're engaging and leading their teams.
Excellent. So there's something we're gonna pivot in about 5 to 7 minutes to some of the questions that have come in from the audience. But there's something that really I think became unstuck for me in listening to you all, and that is related to equity. And so I would guess that all of our organizations have some statement, level of commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are all working diligently, I know, at figuring out what that looks like, how it manifests itself, how we live into it. Historically, I think we all know it has definitely been far more around race, ethnicity, gender, etc., sexual orientation. And there's something that is, again, become unstuck for me around how we think about equity as it relates to this period in time for our employees, and how equity shows up even when we are talking about folks who are impacted differently by the pandemic. And so, Sarah, you hit on this a little bit, and I know in previous panels we've talked a lot about grace and care for people, and in particular those that are more impacted by the pandemic than others. And so just curious to hear from you all, as I say that, how do you think that this might transform how you think about equity in your organization? Because ultimately we default to this place of equality, right? Everybody gets the same thing. That means we're doing good. We know that the true sense of equity is not that. It means meeting people in different places depending on their needs. And so, Sarah, would love to just start with you in terms of how this may change how organizations and businesses are thinking about equity.
Yeah, I think it's more than even equity, Mila. I think it's what I am hearing more and more is it's rooted in this sense of belonging, right? Everyone, just how we work differently, how we're not able to interact anymore in person and necessarily like actually communicate in ways that work for us, right? All of these things are challenges that contribute to our feelings of maybe not having equitable access, maybe not getting the kind of support or compensation that we've received in the past. Like all of those relate to equity, but more and more what I'm seeing the pandemic and everything that's happened over the last 9 months sort of shine a light on is that these are becoming inclusion issues, and they're solved only by helping people feel a sense of belonging, right? So the feeling that we want our employees to have is that they belong, and it's individual for everyone based on our identity, based on our role, based on our tenure at the company, all of these things. And so I think we would be missing something if we were running around just trying to be equitable, and where we really need to put our focus is on what does it mean if I'm the manager, what does it mean for the 5 people on my team to have a sense of belonging? And it's going, again, to be different for each and every one of them. And so like really honing in on that with our managers and giving them trainings around being an inclusive leader so that that feeling emerges for everyone on their team. And that is where I think a sense of equity also emerges.
Excellent. Anyone else want to take a stab at that? Any thinking about that? I got you all. Robin, you look like you're ready, but I don't know.
No, I guess if we had a minute, I wanted to go back to the previous question. I just
please do, friend. Please do.
So everybody's kind of sharing. Here's what we're doing. One of the things that we've done is we've always valued work-life balance and finding ways to kind of integrate life responsibilities and work responsibilities. We've started rewarding. In the past, we would reward those top performers. Oh, she really killed herself on this project. He really went above and beyond. And so we still do that, but we've made space to reward people who are demonstrating good work-life balance. Those people who can put up the boundaries and say, you know what, I got to shut it down right now. And I love, some of what other people talked about. I think Cynthia, you shared that we have a COVID prevention day. So same kind of thing, like empowering our people that it is okay to say no. And we're not going to recognize you just because you pulled an all-nighter. We'll also recognize those people who know how to prioritize their mental health sometimes.
Excellent. Okay, folks, I am going to bring our lovely host, Steve, back for a moment. These commercial breaks bring me joy. And then we are going to pivot into Q&A from the audience. Steve.
Thanks, Mila, for that nice reintroduction. And thanks to all of you who are participating in our webinar called Inclusive Performance Management, Why Empathy is the Key Ingredient. And thanks to our sponsor, Bravely. At this point, we'll be taking questions from our audience members. You've submitted a lot of really good ones already. Mila, you have a lot to choose from. Back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I do want to start with one of the questions related to examples of questions of empathy. And so a few folks have talked about, I think Deep in particular, you referenced that you all have added some questions related to empathy. So if you all could just spend a few minutes, that would be great, sharing some of the new questions that you might be asking related to this topic.
Yeah, I've already shared the empathy question, which is inviting support from the manager to the employee and from the employee to the manager. So triggering that conversation. The other set of questions that we had in our performance were alignment focused. So are you aware of the leadership and company OKRs, right? OKRs is our goal setting methodology. And just that awareness question will sometimes trigger, a conversation in the direction of, are my goals then aligned with what the company is trying to do? Or am I going in my own path, which was pre-pandemic and might need a change. So while it's not directly empathetic, but those alignment questions also makes the conversation more richer and brings them to really understand the perspective of the organization as well as the employee and strives towards alignment. So those are a few suggestions of questions that can drive a more holistic performance conversation.
Yeah, Mila, this is Cynthia. I was looking for what some of those specific questions were, but they did go to how do you feel, which is different. A lot of companies, that's a new area for people. How do you feel was one of those. And I'm in human resources, so people always say you're touchy-feely, but a lot of people are hesitant to go there. But we absolutely went there and said, how are you feeling during this pandemic? What do you feel about the company, what we have done, and what more can we do? So a lot of open-ended, but some very specific ones that you hit a smiley face, a grumpy face, or a frown, just to figure out, to be realistic about how people feel and what they're going through, and to kind of solicit some of the real experiences that people are having. So I think off the top of my head, that's one or two of the questions, but I'll look for some others that we were able to ask.
Excellent. Thank you. Jaison, were you going to chime in?
I was just going to say, we actually had this debate. We've recently launched our year-end performance management process or talent review process and our year-end survey. And I was really debating on where does this question best fit? Should it be in our engagement survey or should it be in our performance evaluation? Because I think context is important, and how the person reading that information is interpreting it. And so we landed more with, asking questions more in I'll call it the empathetic vein in the well-being section of our survey versus performance management. And I will say one other thing, we've talked about equity, right, in performance management. And I had a whole debate with the people leadership team because I had drafted a note to try to guide managers to think about and to incorporate people's different scenarios into their evaluation for performance. But it's not a catch-all, right? And so, once your friends in legal kind of read it and they're like, well, which way you go, right? That's basically happened, right? They put the kibosh on it because it's not very easy. It is something that is new. And how do you account for that when you've got, I call it a system or process that's run and you've already got certain understandings around, what's expected and how to account for it. So it is not an easy process, but I'm hoping, and everyone has said this, right, that we've encouraged managers to have different types of conversations to unlock new information that they will have, and that should hopefully play into their evaluation of anyone on their team, versus just going, strictly on performance and not taking in consideration this whole other bucket load of information around what that person had to do to just, meet or, exceed, if they were able to, expectations.
Excellent. Thank you all. I would like to move to another question that we received. The question is, for those of you who had less formal reviews or perhaps no rating, how did you determine / differentiate bonus and compensation when people were probably expecting at least 100% or more? So anyone who deals with bonus structures can please chime in here.
I can jump in, Mila. This was the first year, and again, it is still an ongoing learning situation. And so, how do you then classify or manage performance when you don't have a rating that so many of us are so used to going to? You know, what are you, 1, 2, 3, or whatever? And when that's gone, then what do you put in its place? And it's not gone completely, because you have to be able to differentiate performance. And I think that's the biggest thing. And it goes back to something I said earlier about what was the expectation for your role and what were you to perform, and how did you get not only the what, but the how you got it done will become relevant. And I think managers have to learn how to speak in those terms. Like, how do you talk about not only the what it is that you wanted them to do, but how did the how play into that? And so I think it is an ongoing education and time perspective that people have to learn how to communicate in terms of that. What it is that you were tasked to do and how you did it. So I work predominantly in a sales organization or with the sales group, and you may hit your number or do whatever, but boy, you broke so much glass in between that we're still cleaning it up. And that's an important factor. And so a manager has to be able to articulate that. And that's a new muscle. And it's a new muscle for many. It's not for all, but for many, in terms of how do I articulate that, or how do I say that, and how do I put into words what I'm trying to describe. So we've had to help managers with that piece of it.
Yeah, I guess differentiation is important. And I think, you know, a few years from now, I think all the companies sort of went through that learning process when removing ratings was like the thing to do. And then suddenly, like, how do you differentiate, right? So one of the things that we did was that we believe that, you know, just having no ratings would not be a good place to be, because you know, differentiation would become more challenging, and it's all about measurement and segmentation. You know, there are so many decisions which sort of pivot on that. So one of the things that we do is we do micro ratings, right? So we get managers to rate employees on multiple things rather than having one number like a 3 or a 4 or a 5 to go with an individual. You could be a 3 on something but a 5 on something else. So that sort of objectifies your judgment and allows you to isolate it on different factors, and an aggregate of that can then result where you get placed on the overall segmentation map for the company. So that process has worked well for us. And in the you know, wake of the pandemic, we tried to, again, look at those micro rating factors and try to define them more empathetically. You know, so that was our change of approach, which helped us just steer through this this process. We did continue with our calibration process, unlike what Jaison said, because you know, we had decisions regarding equity and bonuses which had to be taken, right? So so we did go forward with, but we did again modify our calibration process to be more empathetic, to account for various other factors that were affecting performance.
Excellent. So I'd love to pivot to going back to the conversation that we had about managers and supporting managers. We have a question that reads, how have you navigated and balanced encouraging managers and employees' privacy and psychological safety to be vulnerable and share versus oversharing and burnout?
I can just comment on what has emerged as even myself, I can talk about my own, I'm a co-founder of a company, right? And I often hide what's really going on in my life, because I feel like I can't every day say again that it's total chaos and just as hard as yesterday, maybe even harder, right? Even though eventually I end up saying the truth at some point in the week or the month to my team. And that is a constant struggle right now for people. It's this like, how do I be vulnerable and honest about my circumstances and not feel like it could potentially, you know, have a negative impact on my growth, my development, my performance review, all of these things, right? And it goes back to really creating that culture of conversation and making sure that your managers understand that they need to stand up and model this behavior for their teams and drive home that they will not grow weary of hearing, whatever is going on personally, because that is the key to unlocking people's potential and helping them move forward. So much of what we do on a daily basis right now at Bravely is help people think about, like, how can I get through my week? How can I create an action plan with all of these other challenges that I'm facing to just get it done? Or how do I communicate this now to my boss that I'm not able to do all of the things that I have on my plate? And, these are skills that, obviously it's great if a company offers Bravely, but these are skills that managers can be trained on. And it's a culture, again, that I see this shift happening, that they are standing up and are able to share their own experiences, just like I challenge myself to do, so that way the other mothers on my team, if they're having a bad morning, can say, Sarah, I am not going to be able to plug in the way that I normally would until around noon. And because I've modeled that behavior, they feel open to do that. And I know that they'll probably work into the evening or, do whatever it takes to get what they need to get done. But you have to model the behavior to create the freedom.
One thing I would add is, someone mentioned it might have been Deep, right? Like the playing field has been leveled, right? Our whole organization is on Zoom. And so every day we get to see into the lives of everyone that we interact with that we didn't before. Right. And so we see the children coming in, we see the husband or other partner, walking behind and getting, right. The distractions are there in your face. So to some degree, a level of privacy has been erased. Right. And so I think that has facilitated people just being real around what is happening around them, because Zoom has also become the water cooler. Right? Or Slack has become the water cooler. So I think what we're finding is that people are adapting, and the same things that we viewed as privacy before is not the same lens that we are doing now. And I think that's, someone asked in one of the questions around what aspects around performance management, do we think are going to be changed? And while I don't yet have a prediction on what that will be, but I do think the level of bringing your full self to work is now, like, the veil has been lifted, and that will now be part of the conversation, part of the manager's role, and should be in all consideration for, how did I perform this quarter? What was I able to get done? Because the pandemic has taught us, there's not much that's out of bounds at this point.
And Jaison, to your point about privacy, so I choose not to wear makeup and be on Zoom. I can control that. My 7-year-old walking in his underwear while I'm talking to my boss's boss, I couldn't control that. So I think that the privacy, it's different, and the veil has been lifted. And I think different people can manage it in different ways. But to get back to, I think when you were asking of, how do you empower managers and how does that happen? It starts from above. If the leader of your organization is putting it out there that, they share some of their personal story, they reveal what's going on in their lives, then it cascades down that list or down your organization to allow people to open up. Now, at the end of the day, some people are more or less private than others. And, I think we also have to respect that. But to the extent managers feel comfortable, we have encouraged them. I mean, and we've done this thankfully before the pandemic too, but to open themselves up to share what's going on in their lives so that employees, reciprocate that.
Yeah, this is Cynthia. I love what Sarah said about, it just flew right out of my head. I'm sorry, but kind of to the point of bringing your whole self to work and modeling the behavior. That is so key, that if we have more of our managers start to model that and say that they're okay with it, that really helps. But the other thing we did was what Robin mentioned about, if you're not comfortable as a manager or leader and not having your camera on, don't have your camera on. That's acceptable. To not force, we had people that really wanted to force everyone to put the camera on. So we say, wait, back off a little bit. You're crossing that line. You have to be careful and look at how that works. So, and then we have things like once a month, we have a no meeting or no Zoom meeting Friday. And again, that started from the top, and it just became that thing that everybody says, you know, no meetings on Friday because people on this particular one. So again, that modeling, and particularly at the senior levels of the organization, is so important. Very important.
Excellent. Cynthia, I'm actually going to go back to you and anyone who can answer this question, but you talked about pandemic prevention days. And so we had a couple of questions where people wanted to know exactly what a pandemic prevention day is.
Oh, okay, yes, and I noticed that, I know Robin or a few others mentioned that they have that, and those are days where you're paid, you continue to get your pay. For us, it's like a sick day, but it's not charged a sick day, so whatever you have to do that day that's related at all to the pandemic, and it doesn't have to be so tightly related. Anything from taking care of someone for the day, getting tested, or just anything, taking care of your kids, getting them on the Zoom, whatever you feel you need to do. But we allow a certain number of days, and I apologize, it escapes me the exact number, but those are just days that are treated as the same way as you would log a sick day. You get credit for the day.
I'll just add here, we've done, we haven't called them pandemic prevention days, but like we've done days where we've given the whole company off. So we had a launch appreciation day because we've been, ironically, and I've heard this from a lot of companies, we've been able to do something we thought was going to be impossible in a year when everyone was home, remote. And so there's actually, as soon as we're done, we just had a proposal go to our executive team about another potential company day off, because that's the only way you can do it, because our employees have unlimited time off. So unless you shut down the entire company, somebody's going to end up working. So I'm eager to see what happened with it, but that's how we're addressing stress and burnout. It's just trying to shut down the company for a day so people can recuperate. It's not ideal for everyone, but if no email is coming through and no one has meetings, that makes it easier, hopefully.
We've also done wellness day offs, but in Nutanix, we have the practice of wellness days. So we have wellness days and wellness day off. So our wellness day offs is similar to what Jaison said, where everyone, we choose one day every quarter, and that's a day off globally for all our locations. And then we have wellness days, and those are days where we have like a host of wellness activities, from mental wellness, emotional, psychological wellness to open mic sessions, and we encourage employees to participate in at least one of the different options that are available to them around their wellness for that day. And we do that as well once every quarter. So we have wellness days and wellness day offs.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Next question that's come up is, this person says, I'm a manager that wants to practice empathy with my team, but leadership does not embrace this. How can I share empathy with such an unmanageable workload for my team?
That's a really tough one, honestly, because when you talk about, starting a cultural transformation, which is inevitable for all companies that are working, in a very different mode today, the right behaviors, the right practices actually starts from the leaders, right? And if the leaders are not, demonstrating that, then I guess, like I said, a pandemic being a biggest leveler, it has to be brought to their realization on how their behaviors are impacting, the rest of the organization, their team, and the fact that they have an onus to set the right tone, to correct some of the problems. And I think if we were to do a good job of explaining how those behaviors impact, it is possible. It is possible, because one thing that we've realized is people have become much more open to listening, to feedback, to change, because there has not been an option but to change for everybody, right? So I think, I really don't have a solution to offer here, Myla, honestly, because I do believe that leaders have to be very convinced about doing the right thing so that they set the right tone. And most of our successes around all the programs, the culture initiatives that we are running, come from the fact that our leaders lend their voice to it and they show it in their action. One example of this is we started the culture initiative where we are picking one behavior every month and we are just honing in on that. And the first behavior is starting and ending meetings on time. We are constantly crossing that boundary across, because everything is a meeting and there is no transition time in between, and your day is nothing but like a block of Zoom meetings, one after the other, right? Unless you put your ghost blocks. And then that's not happening because people are not equipped. We still are prey to like 30-minute meetings. We can always have 25-minute meetings and 50-minute meetings instead of 60 minutes to give that transition time. So we did this 1 month, we are doing this 1 month long activities where we are making people capable of designing their days in a way so that they can build transition times by scheduling shorter meetings. Like 5-minute meetings is a thing, but it's not a thing if you're always 5 minutes late for a meeting, right? So things like that, but those have been set, the tone for those have been set because leaders started doing it. They started having their own staff meeting, go on time and talk about it with their teams. And that is how it trickles down, right? For me, it's a very top-down approach. I really don't have an answer for this question, but yeah, I think some form of inducing change, even if it is towards leadership, is what's required here, in my opinion.
I believe this is being recorded. You could maybe share this recording with him or her. No, in all seriousness, but I have used that same strategy because I think the answer is to push back and suggest change. And in different circumstances, I've said, hey, our competitors are doing this, that, and the other, and these are really great ideas. We need to seriously consider it.
And I would just say, why would you let leadership stop you from being a good manager? Do what's the right thing for your team, right? Go back and have the highest engagement scores, the highest performance. And when they ask what's different, you tell them. But I wouldn't let their point of view stop my team from being phenomenal, because, I think that's just what you need to do.
Absolutely. Empathy is not separate from driving performance. It's an integral part of the process. Yeah. Any great leader is that I've worked for has been empathetic. And I would just say to this person, a lot of times we don't have the examples in front of us or people modeling this behavior, but if your instincts are leading you to behave differently, follow them, become your own leader. We don't have to integrate the bad qualities and the people above us that we work for. We can create our own definition of leadership, and you can still find out what's happening with each of your employees and offer support while also sharing with them, modeling that vulnerability that unfortunately for you, you still have to drive productivity and performance. And you need their help, and you'll help them be strategic and solve as much as you can. But sharing your own challenges while asking how you can help is a great way to show your leadership.
Sarah, Jaison liked that so much when you said empathy can't be separate from performance. Jaison went and wrote that down. I saw him jump right in. He's like, I'm writing that one down.
I agree.
Cynthia, were you going to add something in before I pivot to the next question?
I was going to chime in on Robin's comment that I work primarily with sales, so they're very competitive, but always take it to the bottom line. And I think it's been proven that people that do show empathy and are more empathetic, especially during this pandemic, we get higher levels of performance and performance management because of that. So where you can show an alternative that, hey, your competitors are doing that, and it's okay if you don't want to participate or play. Just know that there's a consequence for that. So I think that's another good thing to bring up.
Excellent. So we have about 6 minutes left. So I think we might be able to get into more, but at least one. So let's go into this one. Someone says, I work at a company that is planning to launch performance management in the next few months. What are your thoughts on the essential and non-essential components to launch with empathy during COVID?
I'll go first. If I go back to our very first conversation, it's important, and I love the way that Deep said the why is one of their cultural principles. You have to be fiscally responsible and you have to stay in business. And so I think if you tie it back, your performance management system tie back to that why and what it is you have to do in order to sustain yourself as an organization, as a viable company. If you start with that foundation, then any performance management, what makes that good, what makes that great, or what makes it sustainable should be a good principle to start with.
And I would just say identifying what are your must-haves, right? I mean, I talked about, we had a principle, our fundamental principle around performance management is every employee needs to know where they stand. So if you determine what are the core components that are your must-haves, you know, use that as your baseline and strip everything else out and say, hey, can we have a successful process if those things are not a part of it or if they're scaled back, but our must-haves are in there. And that would be, you know, my recommendation. Stand on your principles of what's most important for your organization.
And I'll just add a different perspective here, that it's also important to keep performance management processes very simple and flexible. You know, I'm talking both from a content standpoint and also how it's delivered. You know, that really impacts the experience of how people are doing it. Do they find it easy? Do they find it like a big burden? You know, what systems are delivering it to them? Are you reminding them just enough, or, you know, are you bordering towards being a botheration for them? Too many reminders. So I think those aspects of thinking through how you're going to build that process so that it gets delivered as an experience is also important, you know, besides the content itself.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask one last question. Maybe two of you can chime in before we have to hand it back over to our host from day one. And so the question is, what kinds of resources and benefits are you all offering to people, especially stressed parents, to help them perform better under these circumstances?
I can't say necessarily parent focused. I mean, I think for parents, our biggest lever that we've pulled is flexibility. But we've given our employees access to Headspace for free. It started with 6 months and now it's continued into next year. So I think that's been a great way to encourage meditation, mindfulness, helping get to sleep, those kind of things.
Nutanix offers Rethink, which is actually a support to parents who are raising children with learning and behavior challenges, developmental disabilities. Again, very, very well appreciated resource. So what Rethink does is it offers live teleconsultations with behavioral health experts. You know, they answer questions, they provide a range of resources that can as a follow-up for that conversation, their podcasts, webinars, and just expert advice. So that has been a big lifesaver for parents who were, you know, with children with learning disabilities at home. So this resource is something that we incorporated much before the pandemic, but got heavily utilized during.
I've seen
This is Cynthia. I was just going to say, make sure you leverage what you have. I think we found EAP, all of those things that you already offer. The exercise, the workout programs, all of that, just promote that to the help. That'll be helpful. But one thing I'll have to say about NetApp that I was really happy to see is we went really way overboard on the giving back, because the feel good that came out of that was just off the charts. Everyone wanted to jump in and participate and show what they've done, giving food, giving money, giving this, giving that. That certainly went, I would say that we pumped that up and went a little bit overboard with it, but the feel good and the give back was just tremendous. So if you're thinking about anything, absolutely think about the give back.
Excellent. So we have to wrap here. I am going to toss it back to Steve, but before I do, just want to send so much gratitude to a phenomenal panel. I'm sure Steve is about to say something very similar. But as the moderator, I really enjoyed engaging with you all today. I learned a ton and just really grateful for your overall engagement and thoughtfulness. Steve?
That's exactly what I was going to say, Mila. Thank you to our wonderful speakers. We're really honored to host such an insightful conversation, so thanks. Thanks also again to our sponsor, Bravely, and to all of you for participating today in the audience. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromdayone.co, and check out more of our upcoming webinars and conferences. Tomorrow, in fact, December 3rd, we'll be presenting HR and the CEO, the most critical relationship for success in 2021. Next Thursday, December 10th, we'll be talking about how technology is changing employee experience. And on Tuesday, December 15th, we'll be doing our 5th full-scale virtual conference with panel discussions, workshops, and networking. The focus is on inclusive leadership in 2021, creating diversity, accountability, and real equity. Visit our website at fromdayone.co to learn more. Thanks, everyone. Stay well.